Let us look at the learning outcomes for this module. After studying this module, you shall be able to get an idea of how the issue of power imbalance is approached in the qualitative research. You will be able to comprehend an alternative notion about power as it is operationalized by the institutions, with particular emphasis on its productive aspect and denial of the quality of oppression as widely related to the concept of power. You will be able to understand the dynamics of power as it manifests in the fieldwork and the constant power shifts between the researcher and the participants throughout the various stages of the research process. Acknowledge the interconnectedness between the power and the ethics of qualitative research and why it is important to consider ethical issues while attempting to manage power. You will be able to infer certain ethical and methodological steps to be administered in order to check for the power imbalance arising during the research process. Introduction. This module chiefly explains how the issue of power is handled in qualitative research. The description begins with putting forth the approach towards power in various paradigms of the qualitative research. Then, a well-established view of power as it functions in the society is presented as postulated by the philosopher Michel Foucault. The political framework of social scientific research is also mentioned that influences the data collection as well as the research process of the qualitative inquiry. After that, the power relationship as it develops between the researcher and the participant during the research situation is assessed, followed by the power shifts that occurs in the interview methodology. Next, it is described how power and ethics are two sides of the same coin and how ethical issues are implicated in the power dynamics of research situation. At last, certain ethical and methodological recommendations are prescribed to be followed by the researcher.
General approaches towards power in qualitative research. Qualitative inquiry subsumes several paradigms, and there are considerable variations amongst its various paradigms and traditions. Nevertheless, despite the distinctions among various traditions of qualitative research, each of them advocates towards reducing the power differences and encouraging authenticity and disclosure between the researcher and the person who is studied. All the paradigms of qualitative research presupposes a redistribution of power and views research as a co-production of knowledge by the researcher and participant, wherein a segregation between the researcher and the participant is blurred, and the control over the representation of knowledge is shared between both of them. Several traditions of qualitative inquiry, such as biography, case study, and phenomenology, hold the common epistemological ground. That is, the researcher should attempt to minimize the distance of researcher-participant relationships. They should actively remove the power imbalance between the researcher and the participant and the notion of ownership of the research from the researcher and redistribute ownership with the participants. Other traditions, such as constructionist tradition, emphasize the co-construction of knowledge between the researcher and participants and places more emphasis on the researcher's role and responsibility to construct knowledge. This tradition strives to maintain a proper balance between developing friendship with participants and keeping adequate distance that will allow professional judgment. However, The premise of delivering the promise of power democratization as well as control sharing itself raises many ethical and methodological dilemmas related to research control, power issues, and knowledge ownership because of the following aspects. Incongruence in the research relationship arising out of the incompatibility between the ethics of having equality and the overall macro setting of dominance and authority that is especially prevalent in certain research macro settings, such as in the healthcare system, where the distribution of power is inherently unequal and hierarchical. Decisions in the hand of the researcher of whether to engage the participants in the data analysis process, which has the potential to interfere with this delicate relationship, thereby further complicating the situation. Thus, in order to restore the balance of power equality in qualitative research practice, it is essential to focus first and foremost on the various ethical and methodological dilemmas and try to understand their effect on the participant, the researcher, and the research process. Foucault's view on power relations. Michel Foucault was a renowned French philosopher, psychologist, historian, and social theorist. The problem of power was central to his thinking regarding the relations between society, individuals, groups, and institutions. His theories showed the relationship between power and knowledge and how they combine to form the basis of social control through formal institutions. The main idea that emerged from all his work is that the power in action can mainly be observed in the relations between the individual and his society, predominantly its institution. Various institutions exert their power on groups and individuals, and the latter, in response to the effects of power, affirm their own identity through resistance. Usually, power is understood as the ability to force others to do things they do not wish to do. In this sense, power is conceptualized as possession, as something owned by those in power. But according to Foucault, power is not something that can be owned, but rather something that manifests itself in a certain way. It is more a strategy than a possession. Thus, Foucault states that power should not be viewed as plain oppressive measures implemented through repression and censorship by institutions against individuals and groups. Rather, its operation should be examined in the day to day interactions between people and institutions. Power possesses a productive quality, causing new behaviors to emerge. Thus, Foucault's logic shifts the focus away from the oppressive nature of power and concentrates on the resistance as reaction of those the power is exerted upon. Foucault proposed an alternative model where The power relations are spread throughout all the relational structures of the society, and power is exerted on each other through daily and mundane manners. Power should be analyzed as something that functions in the form of a chain and is employed as well as exercised through a net-like organization where individuals are the vehicles of power and not just the points of its application. This way, power could be understood as having the following features: power as a system, having a network of relations encompassing the whole society rather than a relation only between the oppressed and the oppressor. Individuals are not just the objects of power, but they are the locus where the power and the resistance are exerted. Power is decentered, that is, power is not concentrated on a single individual or class, and power is multidirectional. It does not flow only from the more to the less powerful, but also moves in the opposite direction as well. Conceiving power as strategy and not a possession results in thinking of it as something that has to be exerted and not something that can simply be acquired. Power is not exclusively localized to certain institutions or individuals, rather, it's dispersed throughout all the sets of relations existing in the society. In the context of qualitative research, Grenz proposes that power is fluid and is not possessed by anybody, neither the researcher nor the researched. Rather, this movement of power is shaped by the different positions that researcher and researched take within the research encounter, which subsequently shapes the data and outcomes of the study. Foucault also claims that power is coextensive with resistance, which produces positive effects causing new behavior to emerge, and it is also ubiquitous, that is being found in every kind of relationship as a condition of the possibility of any kind of relationship, whether it is the relationship between parents and children, between lovers, between employers and employees. They all are power relations, and in every human interaction, power is subject to negotiation, with each individual having his place in the hierarchy. Political framework of qualitative research. To a greater or lesser extent, politics suffuses all social scientific research. It can involve the micropolitics of personal relations to the cultures and resources of research units and universities, the policies of government research departments, and the ultimate heavy hand of the central state itself. Certain features that have material impact on qualitative research and fieldwork in particular, thus shaping the politics of fieldwork, are discussed as follows. Researcher's personality. The personality of the researcher and his or her intellectual approach and ability to work in the field helps to determine his or her selection of research topics. Personal and intellectual path also leads the researchers to drop one line of inquiry and to pursue a particular aspect. Family circumstances can be important in terms of absences and freedom to travel. Spouse's support or lack of it can also prove crucial to the continuation of the field project. Geographical proximity. One simple factor that is considered over in terms of selecting topics and field settings is geographical proximity. Some researchers just prefer to travel conveniently down the road to the nearest morgue, mental hospital, or action group. Researchers' institutional background. The reputation of the institutional background of the researcher creates many research opportunities, and the backing of prestigious academic institutions may be vital in having access to some settings. Gatekeepers. It has been remarked that social science research is not engaged by any organization but by individuals in gatekeeping or sponsorship, or those who helps in making contacts to the subjects to be studied. Thus, this way, gatekeeper could be crucial in terms of access and funding. The outcome of the research, therefore, is always mediated through the needs, resources, and roles of such individuals. The researchers may continually suffer by being seen as extensions of their political sponsors despite their denial. Furthermore, gatekeepers need not be perceived only in terms of government agencies and corporate representatives, but can also be found in scientific funding bodies, among publishers, and within academic settings. Status of field workers. The impact that the presence of researchers has on the setting is related to the status and visibility of the field workers. The lone researcher often has no big issues regarding funding, gains easy access, and swiftly adjusts into the field. The hired hands, on the contrary, are highly visible as they come with a team of people, are tied to the contractual obligations, and are expected to deliver the outcome within a specified period of time. Publishing. The ongoing cooperative relationship in the field between the researcher and the research group may be dishelved when comes the moment of writing and impending publication. During this phase, the subjects of the study suddenly see themselves interpreted and summarized in ways that may not match up with their own perspectives they had provided regarding the natural settings. Although the research bargain includes an explicit obligation to consult the researched group on publication, this may also result in severe difference of opinion. Such issues are mostly unanticipated by the researcher in the sense that it is difficult to predict what the research group will find objectionable. Expectations in team research. A variety of expectations and roles in team research can hinder behavior in the field and lead to conflict about outcomes. Various aspects of team research, like leadership, supervision, discipline, morale, status, salaries, and intellectual division of labor, can promote unexpected tensions in the field, leading to disputes about publications, clash between the junior assistant and senior researcher, as well as a breaking up of love affair among team members, can create disruptions in the smooth functioning of the research process. Workloads, ownership of data, rights of publication, career and status issues all are affected by the constraints of team research. Researchers' positionality. The feeling of power and powerlessness is often described by the positionality of the researcher. Positionality of the researcher indicates the particular social, structural, and organizational positions that individuals occupy that defines the identity, power structures, and social fields of the individual which mediate their interactions. The specific positions of the researcher, such as the shared ethnicity and belonging to the same gender, interact in the research process to produce insider outsider contexts. While the aspects of race and ethnicity can be a unifying factor, issues of gender, sexuality, nationality, and class are constantly at work shaping the power discourse in the researcher researched relationship. Participants' positionality. The status and position of the participants, their context, also determines the shaping of power dynamics in the research interaction. Factors of social position, status, and location yields power. Participants who are rendered vulnerable due to several macro-level features such as poverty and experience of care system may also experience powerlessness during the interview situation. However, the participants who are clear that they are engaged in the research with the purpose of altruism and helping the researcher may work as a strategy by which participants reclaimed power back by placing themselves in a helper position. Power relations between the researcher and the researched. As we have concluded from above, qualitative inquiry holds a critical view about the hierarchical relations of power between researchers and participants. It deviates remarkably from the positivistic worldview that sees the researcher as a neutral observer who objectively examines various human phenomena and alone contributes to the thinking that goes into the project, while the job of the subject is only to contribute the conduct to be studied. All the paradigms of qualitative methodology depart from this conception of power relations and attempts to redistribute the power between the researchers and participants. However, the relationship between the researcher and participant is complex in qualitative research owing to the significant and conflicting roles of both the groups. Participants are the main providers of data, the storytellers. The researcher is a data collector, philosopher of the study, analyzer of the participants' stories, and the writer. Thus, in order to balance the power hierarchy of the researcher aims at creating a welcoming, non-threatening environment in which the interviewees are willing to share personal experiences and beliefs during the collection of data. The non-threatening environment is created by developing a feeling of empathy for informants that enable them to open up about their stories. This intimacy feeling is fueled by the informal, anti-authoritarian, and non-hierarchical atmosphere in which the qualitative researcher and participants establish their relations in an atmosphere of power equality. The choice of names and words is crucial in providing various clues to the perceived power relation between the researcher and participants. The language used to label research roles varies according to the discipline and type of research, and it can range from expressing equal partnership among them to symbolizing a distinct expert subject relationship. The examples of these terms vary from highly hierarchical power relationships, for example, researcher and participant, to more egalitarian relationships, for example, co-researcher. Different paradigms and traditions within the field of qualitative research also differ in the way they use power relation terminology. For example, informant versus collaborator. These variations highlight the point that even in some qualitative research paradigms, participants are not always considered to be the real experts. Relationships are also affected by several other factors, such as the content of inquiry, the institutional context in which the study is carried out, and the researcher and participants' personal motivations. Many times, researchers' motivations to initiate research projects involve fulfilling their own professional interests, such as earning an academic degree or receiving funding. Power relations during different stages of the research. A research project always follows a developmental sequence in the form of different stages. Each stage has a different purpose that, to a certain degree, shapes the respective roles of the participants and researcher. The developmental nature of the research process also leads to changes in power relations with respect to these five stages. Initial stage of participant recruitment. During this stage of research process, the control lies in the hand of the researcher who decides the manner in which the research should be introduced to potential participants, how to describe the research goals, advocate about the benefits of the research, and ensure maximum cooperation. The amount and quality of the information offered related to the research are dependent entirely on the researcher's decision. The main aim of this stage is to persuade potential participants to participate in the research and share their personal experience and knowledge. The participants, on the other hand, own the knowledge and experience needed to perform the study. Data collection. During this stage, power and control exists largely with the participants. At this stage, the researcher is entirely dependent on the participants' willingness to take part in the research and to share their knowledge of the research subject. They seem to have the control and ownership over the quantity and quality of the data shared with the researcher. This sharing, to some extent, depends on the relationship that develops between the researcher and participants. Data analysis and production of the report. Following the termination of the data collection stage, the control and power returns over to the hands of the researcher. From this stage, the story shared by the researcher is separated from the participant, and the researcher becomes the storyteller who rephrases the story into a new historical, political, and cultural context. In view of ethical considerations, the researcher also has total responsibility towards the participants. They are allowed to share the data analysis process with the participants or letting them join in the final stage of writing. Validation. After data collection and analysis are completed, some researchers choose to re-engage participants with their analysis. This is done with the objective of strengthening the trustworthiness, accuracy, and validity of the research findings and also to empower the participants. The participants re-engage through different levels of involvement. Some participants are allowed to transcribe the interview by the researcher, while others let them edit the transcripts. Some prefer to present participants with the emerging themes. Others prefer presenting the final draft of the research. Some, for various reasons, choose not to get back to the participants at all. Additional publications. Using the research data for additional research purposes mostly appears to be the researcher's entitlement. But on the contrary, this stage raises the main question as to whom the data actually belong: the participant, the researcher, or the research community. Even though the consent form signed by the participant at the beginning of the process grants some approval to circulate the data, it is possible that participants were not completely aware of the fact that their authorization also involves a complete rejection of knowledge ownership to others. Power shifts occurring in interview methodology. Interview is the most prominent method of collecting data in qualitative social research. The qualitative research interview can neither be stated as an objective nor a subjective method, as its main essence lies in the interplay of subjective interactions, and also objectivity itself is a rather subjective notion. As per humanistic perspective, the interview situation suggests an egalitarian status for both the interviewer and the interviewee. However, this is not the actual case, as power imbalance is penetrated in various levels of the interview method. The qualitative research interview is regarded as having an uneven power distribution between the interviewer and the interviewee. While the interviewer possesses the monopoly of interpretation of the data, the interviewees may also assume countermeasures against the unidirectional approach of the interviewer. These countermeasures involve deliberate attempts to offset neither's approach to questions posed in an interview situation. Thus, we shall now attempt to understand the dynamics of power asymmetry in interview situation. Typologies of power in interview method. Power has several features within the interview method, which involves controlling and constraining others' views and achieving one's goal by enforcing one's will on others' opinion. Power in the interview situation is determined by the socio-economic status, educational or professional background, and gender or ethnic identity of the parties involved. There are three dimensions of power involved in the interview method. The first dimension involves power shifts of uneven, direct confrontations between parties where control is explicitly displayed. The influence of asymmetrical power distribution. It is claimed that interviews have a disguised built-in power asymmetry against participants by the virtue of their prescribed roles during the course of the interview. With regards to the prescribed roles of the interviewer and the interviewee, causing asymmetric distribution of power in the interview, the former seem to have a direct power over the latter. This could be explained in the way that the interviewer sets the stage, controls the setting, and prepares the script and initiates the questions asked in accordance with his or her research interest. Power and ethics. Ethics and power presuppose one another. We cannot understand what ethics is without knowing something about power and vice versa. Since the relation between researcher and researched is articulated as a power relation, so it naturally gives rise to certain ethical demands. It's the very presence of power in the relation between the researchers and researched that constitutes the ethical issues. Without power relations, there are no ethical issues. It is important to discuss ethics in relation to power in qualitative research. Researchers are usually considered relatively more powerful in the power relation between researchers and researched. Hence, the researchers have ethical obligations to the people they study. It seems undoubting that the qualitative research as practiced is in fact an asymmetrical power relation where the interviewer has the scientific competence, the right to pose questions, and set the agenda. The research is conducted in order to serve the researcher's end, and interviews are often manipulative where interviewers use subtle techniques to get beyond the subject's defenses, and they have also the privilege to interrupt and report about the subject's reality. Although anonymity in research is a good thing as it works to protect the participants, it can also serve to deny the participants a voice in the research product. So, anonymity, which is often presented as an essential part of the ethical code, can function as a power technique that silences the participants and provides the researcher with freedom to interpret the subject's account according to his or her own research interests. Interviewees, moreover, feel honored that a researcher is interested in spending time with them and study them. Hence, it is an exception that the research participants would object to the researcher's questions and interpretations. It is impossible to avoid having power over the person with whom we associate, as this is a fundamental human condition. The basis of ethics lies in the fact that human encounters are power relations. The only reason for ethical demands to exist is that what we do have consequences for other people that can sometimes be serious. Ethical and methodological recommendations. The researchers are advised to have recourse to several methods in order to check for the power imbalance that exists during the research situation by virtue of the researcher's probable superior status over the participants. Hence, the researchers are supposed to follow these set of ethical practices prescribed for before, during, and after the research. Before the research, the researcher should make attempt to meticulously examine the goals and reasons underlying the study. They should approach the field setting and increase their familiarity with the group to be studied by understanding their culture and history. They should present the aims and objectives of the study in an open and transparent manner, clarifying the roles, responsibilities, and rights of both the participant and the researcher in the different stages of the research. They are obliged to protect privacy and anonymity of the participants. During the research, the researcher should make careful use of language that matches and suits the interviewee's capabilities and life experiences. They should be vigilant during the ongoing research situation about the development of any kind of power relations from their side and facilitate an open, communicative environment between themselves and the participants, wherein the latter are allowed to criticize the research as well as its methods. They should also give the participants the right to object. The researcher should be bound to administer verification of interviews at various stages of the study to confirm their understanding of the participants' account and simultaneously seek the participants' permission to use the data obtained from their account at every possible stage. After the research, the researcher should continuously check and recheck for their obligations towards the study population by making sure that they're making sincere efforts of not hurting the participants and they're not making their dirty laundry public. They should refrain from representing only their own voice in the research data and make sure that they aren't distorting the participant's voice in any way. They should always keep in mind the idea of protecting the participants' anonymity while transcribing the data.
Let's summarize. Different traditions and paradigms of qualitative research have the common aim of directly reducing the power imbalance that is created unintentionally during the research situation. However, this premise of delivering power equality itself raises several ethical and methodological questions in the form of research control, knowledge ownership, and various other aspects whose effect should be understood properly on the researched, the researcher, and the research process in order to adequately control the power issue. Michael Foucault's influential postulates about power suggest that power isn't oppressive against individuals or groups. It should be seen as a strategy rather than a possession. It is coextensive with resistance, a productive factor because it has positive effects of causing new behaviors to emerge and is ubiquitous as it can be found in all kinds of relations. Politics is implicated in all sorts of social or scientific research, and thus the features of political framework also have material impact on qualitative research and other fieldworks that has accountability for the kind of data which is obtained. Some of the factors that have influence on the research processes are researchers' positionality, participants' positionality, status of the fieldwork, gatekeepers, resources of the research unit, support from the government, etc. Power is not possessed exclusively by either the researcher or the researched. Rather, it is fluid. This movement of power is shaped by the different positions that the researcher and the research take within the research encounter, which subsequently shapes the data and the outcomes of the study. Ethics and power presuppose one another. We cannot understand what ethics is without knowing something about power, and vice versa. It is the very presence of power in the relation between researchers and the researched that constitutes the ethical issues. Without power relations, there are no ethical issues. The researchers are obliged to employ several methods undertaken before, during and after the research in order to check for the power imbalance that emanates during the research process, and also reflexively examining various steps of research conduction with the emphasis on identifying dynamics of power that was implicated in the process helps in rectifying the power imbalances and increases the credibility of the research.